Welcome, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ashish Garg. I'll be moderating today's session on embedded finance and neobanking. Today, I have four very capable panelists with me. We'll be discussing about one of the most hot trend in the industry, which is embedded finance and neobanking, how it is disrupting and impacting commerce as well as retail consumer experience. Right. In today's session, we'll be covering few questions such as how embedded finance is impacting commerce, how it is disrupting commerce, what is the future of commerce over the course of next 5 to 7 years as this becomes much more prevalent in the industry. What are the new use cases we are seeing as the industry is evolving, and also what are the pain points both from regulator as well as banking partners which we are observing. So those are some topics which we'll try to cover in today's conversation. Dinesh, your mic is open. Can you mute yourself? Danish? Thank you. But before we start the session, I'll quickly request all of the panelists to introduce yourself. I'll just give a roll call so that it is easier. I'll start with Vaibhav on the topmost screen for me. Vaibhav. I think Vaibhav is frozen. I don't think he can hear us. So Kiran, why don't you introduce yourself by the time Vaibhav joins us?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kiran. Thanks for having me, Ashish, and rest of the people who have arranged this fantastic panel. I'm a partner at Kalari. Excited to explore the investments. I mean, these are exciting times. I'm sure there are like 60, 70 odd unicorns which will be made in the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, excited to be on the panel and discuss an interesting topic.
No, completely agree with you, Kiran. We all are super excited about this space, and I think the market is very, very nascent, and next 2 decades will be very critical in terms of defining. And in fact, finance is the fabric which pulls everything together, right? So this is a very important discussion, and the topic is also embedded finance, right? Harshil, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Ashish, and thanks everyone. I'm Harshil. I'm the founder and CEO of Razorpay. We started as a payments company about 5 years back, and today we are one of the largest providers of B2B payment gateway for businesses in India. And over the years, we have expanded our scope to help businesses manage payments, banking, and lending under one single platform, powering more than 5 million businesses in India today. Look forward to the discussion ahead.
Wonderful. Excited to have you, Harshil, on the panel. Vibhor, over to you.
Hey, hey everyone. I think I'll start with a very brief intro. In 2007, I started my first venture, right? That time, even registering a company or raising the fund was difficult. But the biggest problem you would have seen at that point in time is explaining to your parent, why do you want to leave a job and start a company, right? As an ecosystem, we have evolved a lot. This is my third venture. I recently started a venture in neobanking called OneBank, right? Being a consumer for financial products all my life, right? And so a lot of things which are broken, which are not embedded, which are not seamless, right? And decided time to fix it.
Wonderful, Vaibhav. I think we'll learn from your experiences, given that you have successfully built 2 ventures prior to getting into this space. We both will be excited to learn from that from you. Vaibhav has joined us back. So Vaibhav, if you can introduce yourself before we start the discussion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So this is Vaibhav here. I've done 2 startups before I joined Open. So I joined Open recently, which is an integrated business banking platform. Prior to that, I've done a lending startup. So it was a purchase-linked consumer lending venture. And prior to that, I was part of the founding team at Zopper. We had a retail tech venture focused on enabling small merchants, with their business. And that part of the business was acquired by PhonePe. I had a B2B commerce venture focused on handcrafted products.
I think we have in today's panel very strong operations experience. And just for the audience, if people are not aware, Kiran was also an operator prior to joining Kalari. Right. So from that background perspective, I think we have a pretty wholesome panel today. Quickly about me, I am a graduate from IIT Bombay, graduated in 2009, chemical engineer by education. I've been investing with Lightrock for last 5 years. We are a sector agnostic fund and invest across sectors. In India, we have invested close to $400 million across 25 companies. Financial services is a very important focus area for us. We have made 9 investments and dispersed close to $150, $160 million across these companies. Super excited to be moderating this panel. Before starting the discussion, for the audience, feel free to ask any questions. And we'll try and cover those during the conversation itself. Otherwise, we'll cover them towards the end of the discussion. So I'll start the discussion with that note. If we look at embedded finance, right, over the course of last 7-8 years, it has evolved as an industry. We see use cases way back, dating back to 2012-13 timeframe. But over the course of last 3-4 years, the way the adoption has happened in the industry, specifically in the small business segment, is humongous. Correct. So Harshil, I want to understand from you, what do you think is driving this adoption, which is right now becoming a trend? What are the key elements which led to this surge of use cases in embedded finance?
Thanks, Ashish. I think the way the ecosystem is evolving in every direction is that, and it is not just in finance, but in every segment we are seeing tech and product are playing an important role in building new experiences for consumers.
Okay. I think we lost Harshil. Weber, would you want to answer that question?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks, Ashish. So as Harshil was saying, I mean, the adoption of tech has been across industries, specifically, with respect to the financial services industry. There's a lot of public utility infra that has been developed, over the last decade, starting from Aadhaar, which kind of brought a lot of Indians, provided. Am I audible? Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. So I was saying that it all started with Aadhaar, so that was providing an identity layer to some 400 million Indians, who lacked one. And as you know, it has kind of transformed how KYC is done across the industry. Then the whole demonetization and UPI happened. It kind of forced people to adopt technology to make payments. And now obviously the data layer is coming into place. That also means that financial institutions have realized that there's another way financial services could be delivered to various audiences, be it SMEs or consumers. So that is really an infrastructural change at a public utility level, which has happened over the last decade, and that is really that combined with digitization, right? I mean, all of these things wouldn't have been possible if smartphones didn't come in hands of hundreds of millions of us. And so that is the infrastructural bit of it. From a small business standpoint, so businesses have started to realize, for example, that if you talk specifically about business banking, the workflows within business banking are broken. You kind of use a lot of disparate tools to run or manage your business. So right from the time money flows into a business, to you being able to make payments with respect to your business, to helping your employees make payments and attribute all of these, and then manage your compliance or taxation and all of that, and all of these disparate pieces, you use different tools to kind of manage all of these different processes. So with people becoming more aware of various tools available at their disposal, or being able to streamline their workflows, I think that is where the adoption really started. And
Correct, Weber. And I think we lost you, Weber. Good point, I think. And over the period of time, because of certain macro trends also, trends such as demonetization or maybe pandemic-related disruption, I think almost significant portion of the country has experienced digital banking in one form or the other, right? If they have not done it themselves, at least someone within their network, within their family has done it, right? And I think this is powerful and this is there to stay, correct? No one can take away that experience from user which they have had in the course of last 1 year. Harshil, we lost you earlier when you were answering this question. Just building upon this question, Harshil, when you started Razorpay 5 years back, 6 years back, and between now, uh, any positive surprises you have seen with respect to how the market has responded? I'm sure when you started Razorpay, you might have started with a particular thesis, correct? And over the course of last several years, you might have seen things working in a particular way or not working for you. So, what's your experience over there?
I know, sorry, I think my connection had issues. In the last 6 years, I think the ecosystem has changed very rapidly and mostly for the positive. I think when we started on payments, the opportunity that we were going after was that we wanted to help SMEs and startup accept payments. But it was hard to imagine, like this is 2014, 15, how big this ecosystem will become. But in the last 6 years, we have seen the way the startup ecosystem and the internet ecosystem in India has grown on the back of a lot of defining moments like demonetization, like GST, like penetration of digital payments in general, geo as an effect, making internet ubiquitous. And finally, I think recently COVID, which has further accelerated digital payments. I mean, so many things have happened and pushed the ecosystem faster and faster than what we had imagined. And I think recently even COVID, I mean, some of these changes were expected and we were expecting them to happen in the next 3 to 4 years. But because of these constant events that have happened in the ecosystem, the changes have happened faster than what we could have imagined. And we have constantly exceeded our own expectations of what we expected the market to be. Let's say, like if you were asking me 6 years back, where would I ever expect the market to be? I think the market is significantly ahead of that and is moving faster than ever. I think that is like a great part of being in the fintech ecosystem. The market constantly keeps surprising you. The regulators, the policymakers, and everybody else is constantly creating new platforms and new policies and new structures to push the envelope. And I think companies like ours are, as long as we are in the right position and have the right capabilities, we're able to take advantage of that. So that's a great part of being in this ecosystem.
Correct. No, absolutely, Harshil. And I'll cover some of these regulatory as well as infrastructure challenges in a bit. But before that, I just want to switch gears and involve more into the conversation. Right. So we talked about how small businesses are looking at financial services, right? How commerce is changing. Vibhor, if we look at retail banking as an experience, right, over the course of last 2 decades, things have not changed drastically.
Yeah.
Though banks have become digital, there is net banking, the interface has changed. Instead of going to a bank branch, you go to a net banking website of a particular bank to avail certain services. Maybe out of 10 services, you may be able to use 7 services, right? How do you see, and again, this industry is very nascent, neo banking for consumers is still very, very nascent. But in the course of last 2 to 3 years, we've seen almost 12 to 15 companies coming up, right? So what is driving the demand right now from retail consumer perspective?
Yeah, I think like Harshil mentioned, right, all the ecosystem has been evolving, right? A lot of things are getting into place, right? During COVID, people didn't really want to use cash, right? Going to ATM was not an option. So digital banking did come into picture a lot, right? That is one factor. The second thing, which I think is a ecosystem which is changing, is people are asking for experience across the board, right? Not just for banking, right? They're asking for a good experience across ordering food, booking cab, right? Ordering anything on Amazon, right? Anything they do, right? I would not have imagined someone will order a TV or 70-inch TV, which costs 2-3 lakh rupees just without seeing it, right? But people are ready to do that now, right? Because Amazon and Flipkart has proven that they will take the return back, right? The money is safe. So fundamentally, a lot of money has gone into building this ecosystem, right? And which has given a lot of comfort to an end user, right? For a bank in general, you will hear a lot about we want to be a super app, right? Technically, if you look at this, right, then Android is a super app, right? You really don't need one more super app coming on Android and then going inside and then having 5 more apps installed and clicking on it and opening it, right? So fundamentally, a neobank has to, right, differentiate itself in the context of not just being a bank, right? It has to be a much more than a bank and be an experience layer, which connects a lot more lifestyle and lot more interaction point of an ecosystem, right? And that is how ecosystem of neobank will evolve. We'll not just solve the banking problem, we'll also solve a lot of problems which are connected to that.
So Vibhor, I have a follow-on question on this, right? If we look at conventional banking, which is more brick and mortar driven, right? We see almost a dozen banks or maybe more than that, which are operational across the country, right? And all having a good wallet share with respect to different consumers, right?
Yeah.
But when we talk about digital banking, do you think that this space will not be able to sustain too many banks? Do we see that this space will only have few banks, or there are enough use cases within the ecosystem wherein each bank will identify its own niche uh, while operating, given that the number of new banks which has come up over the period of last several years, and then all the banks also talking about going digital and trying to set up something which is their own super app.
Yes, I think, Ashish, the point of neobank is, so I'll take two questions differently, right? There are about 34 banks in India, right, registered by RBI, right? Do we have enough scope for these 34 banks to survive and make money and be profitable and be consumer handling? Definitely we do, right? 34 is not a large enough number for the amount of population we have, right? Neobanking in general is getting clouded with the fact of saying everyone who comes into lending, payments, or anything related to this becomes or categorized as neobanking, right? Now, do we have scope for a lot of neobanks to come, right? I would assume at some point in time, we will see unicorns popping up, right? Even in that scenario, right? And we'll have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 unicorns, which will be able to provide you end-to-end service. To give you an example, like one bank is into B2B2C, right, on white collar, right? Then Neo in Bangalore is around blue collars, right?
Correct.
So there are a lot of small markets, actually not small, there are a lot of markets out there, right? A lot of different type of banking needs out there. So there's definitely scope for a lot of innovation, a lot of companies to pop up, right? But I would have talked to like 30 neobanks by now on my own, right? And when I go and talk to a bank or a partner bank, right, they say they get presentation from a different neobank every 2 days, right? Now, you don't have space for 180 neobanks, right, to survive, right? So I think we will have 5-6 unicorn, right, and about 30 banks, right? Beyond that, I think it will get consolidated.
Correct. No, I agree to your point, Vibhor. See, again, we have too many use cases, right? You mentioned about the blue collar workmanship. We're talking about SME businesses. So every business will have its own use case, right? And the beauty about neobank is the user interface. Correct.
Yeah.
If you're able to personalize it per the need, then you can actually create too many niches and have multiple companies coexisting along with each other.
Absolutely.
Right. The other question which I have is for Kiran. Kiran, that you have observed the journey of Paytm also, right? And starting from payment gateway to offering a plethora of services on top of it, right? And eventually getting into Paytm payment banks as well. From your point of view, what new use cases you are seeing in the industry, which you think will become mega use cases over the course of next 5 to 7 years?
Well, what I would say is in the last 5 years, what we have seen is clearly disruption in the payment space and payments. I mean, I'm proud that all the players, including Paytm, Razorpay, PhonePe, we have evolved quite a lot. And I think we are like leaders overall in most of the geographies. I mean, the kind of penetration that we have seen and the adoption that we have seen is phenomenal. So payments is a problem that I think as a country we have led it. I think now what we can see is disruption that will happen in lending and insurance and in banking per se, right? So payments has shown the path for others to say that, yes, there is a large opportunity that lies ahead of us. And there will be many things, what would say themes within those things that can be done very soon. Now, if you look at it, I think 5 years before, I think the number of internet users or the transacting users were far and few. Now today, we have a large internet base thanks to Geo and other infrastructure that we have right now. Now, a lot of that internet users will migrate from general browsing to transacting. So if we have roughly around 100 to 150 million transacting users now, imagine by 2025 we should have that number close to around 500 600 million, right? So that's where the opportunity lies, and that's where you will see that lot many new age companies will come and disrupt the traditional businesses. Now when I say disrupt is like Vibhor said, there is an option for there's a probability that 3 or 4 companies can emerge in that space, but the traditional ones, those who adapt to newer scenarios and adapt technologies and all, will survive and will continue to flourish. But the point is, there's a large opportunity that lies ahead of us in most of these financial services.
Correct. Completely agree with you. Very fair point, right? But if you look at India as a market, right? In our case, the interfaces are still very limited, right? Banks have still not opened up everything to partner with neobanks, with immediate finance companies. Moreover, regulators are also not very clear with respect to the view they are going to take about this industry, about this ecosystem, right? So, in your experience, again, this is a question for the panel, anyone can feel free to answer. In your experience of working with larger PSUs and private sector banks, where do you see the friction right now, and how much time do you think it will take for these banks to align to this new norm, wherein they're able to set up the infrastructure and provide those pipes so that companies like yours can use that to serve customers like us?
Well, I'll take that, and then I'll let Harshal and Vibhor, they are right now in the midst of, and I see a lot of new services coming up. But to answer your question, look, last in Jan, I heard UPI transactions were around roughly 4.2 billion transactions that were done. Right? Now, remember, all of these transactions, no matter what the app is, but the transactions are also processed from the bank's end. So banks are adopting new technologies. They are open to it. It's a matter of time that they will open more APIs so that more and more services can be built. But it's not like what it was 5 or 6 years back, where even getting an API from bank was unthinkable. So you have seen it in case of UPI, how phenomenally they have evolved, how phenomenally they have adopted and scaled their systems. I think it's probably in the next 2-3 years, you will see more and more APIs coming out of banks where more services can be built using them.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Ashish, right? Fundamentally, in my past 9 months of experience in talking to bank and partnering with them, right? They're amazingly open to sharing, right? And collaborating, right? It's not the way it was before, right? When I started, I remember a lot of people said, yeah, bank partnership would take more than 2-3 years, right? Banks have a tendency of moving slow. That is not true, right? You can get to the right place in 3 months if you're connected to the right person. Right, that is around people, right, being open to partnering, right? Then second stage comes on their technically being available, or the API is being ready for them to consume, right? There, most of the neobank will have to do the hard work, right? It's actually going to be a combined work where neobank will do more hard work, and at some point in time they will have enough APIs which can actually just become or sit back on the core banking system, right? And that can become a separate stack. And that is what a lot of other neobanks like Zeta and all has done, right? They build a lot of ecosystem to support their product. And now they're going to CBS, right? And they're going to integrate and give the CBS offering along with everything else, right? And that is how I think most of the things are working out. But fundamentally, RBI or banks, both of them have been very, very supportive, right? They definitely play a role of being a moderator or a listening mode, right? But they're not stopping us from innovating. They give us enough leverage to actually try and experiment, right? Obviously, if something foils tax, right? So you see a lot of transaction which goes fraud in UPI, right? Now, if RBI wanted, they could have just shut down PhonePe, Paytm, Google Pay, any of them, right? But they're not doing that. They're just fixing the problem, trying to figure out if the collect request is even required, right? Because that is major source of fraud in UPI. Right? So those innovations will come, and I think banks are okay working together and taking the risk along with us.
So, Vibhor, you touched upon a very important aspect over here, right? So, as companies, right, as open as Razorpay, as you guys, or as Paytm, none of you guys take the risk, right, while enabling some of these transactions onto these platforms. Correct, because the risk sit with the bank or the service provider who is actually enabling all of these things through your platform. Correct. Now, the question is that you may remember that recently, because of this entire Chinese app crackdown, which was in news, there was significant pushback both from the regulator as well as from the ecosystem players like Google Pay, Google Android Play Store, where they restricted certain apps from doing business on their platform. Correct. Where do you think that the line should be drawn as far as these things are concerned, right? Because see, neobanks are not regulated per se, correct? Because
Yeah.
you are just an infrastructure layer which is enabling certain things, correct? Do you think that this piece of business should also, or this piece of industry should also, there should be some guardrails around it? How do you qualify vendors? How do you allow people to be listed? And do you think there has to be a broader regulatory framework around it? Or should it be left to the players to build enough checks and balances so that the system can survive or thrive without being over-regulated?
So actually, in general, we look ourselves as a experience layer, right? Not infrastructure layer when we talk to a customer, right? Because that is what we bring on the table, right? We are the front face for a bank, right? And it's not true that we don't take the risk, right? Because a lot of transactions first goes through us, right? Like if you are scanning a QR code, a lot of things happens at us, right? So the risk is divided between the bank and the TSP, the technology service provider, which is where neobanks play a role, right? So fundamentally, the risk is definitely divided. Hence, the money is divided of whatever we make. At the same time, the regulatory framework restricts us in a lot of ways, right? Not just from the RBI's perspective. NPCI has a very strict guidelines and rule book where we have to get certified in a lot of scenarios, right? The second thing which comes into play is we have to do a lot of handholding in terms of performance, right? Like if you look at UPI apps, right, they're not allowed to store balance, right?
Correct.
And balance is a very important part for us to personalize the experience, right? A person has to understand. So let's say you have two bank accounts, right? And I want to choose the right bank account from where you want to transfer the money. As an end customer, you really don't care which bank account gets picked up, right? But I can't pick a bank account because I don't know the balance in both, right? So end user has to do that. So experience in some way gets broken where user selects a bank account or a card or something to do the payment, right?
Correct.
So we do get control in a lot of places, right? We do have forums and commission where we can reach out and talk about it and try to build a framework and reach out to RBI, right? We have channels through legal counselor where we can submit a letter to RBI and get a response, right? The best thing which we do at this point in Ashish is to try and push the boundary a bit, right? At the same time, ensure that RBI is aware of what we are doing, right? So there's regular communication which goes from us to RBI, right? Drafted by our name on saying this is what we are trying to do, right? And these are the potential risk possible. And this is what the mitigation we have done, right? The last thing which is very important here is that because we are a financial app, right? And it's the closest you can get to the money, right?
Correct.
Fundamentally, this is money, right? So now we have to go through a lot of certification like PCI DSS, right? Which are not easy to get. Those are global standard certifications which we have to go through, right? And opt for them and be sure that our systems are not hacked, right? And banks can easily sign an indemnity clause and say anything getting hacked at your end is your problem, right? You will reimburse everything, right? So the liability on our side goes very, very high, right? And we are by nature more aggressive and more experimental, right? So we will go and partner with 50 more people, right? And sometimes we lose out on the importance of doing a very, very strict DD, right? Or due diligence with a merchant, right? So one of the constraints which most of the neobank goes through is merchant tie-ups, right?
Correct.
Paytm has about 10 million merchant tie-ups, right? PhonePe would have something. Google is just starting up, right? Doing a lot of merchant tie-ups, right? So almost everywhere merchant tie-up will become important, right? There's no single entity which is doing merchant tie-ups. You can hack it by tying up with Pine Labs or someone who is building a POS machine, but that still is much more difficult because the bill of material doesn't come, right? So we are doing the heavy lifting work, right? With probably keeping both the parties, NPCI, banks, and RBIs, right, in a balance, right? The good point is banks really understand this part, right? And are supporting us in a lot of ways.
No, completely agree with you, Vibhor, and good to know that the banks are supportive of the initiatives, right? Because if they are aligned, only then there could be real innovation with respect to consumer experience.
Yeah.
The other question which I have, and again, Kiran and Vibhor, any of you can answer this question, given your past experiences with Paytm and this space. If we look at the retail consumer experience, or if we look at these transactions which happen through these platforms, right? Globally, the transaction fees are significantly high. Whereas in a country like India, the transaction fees per transaction is super low, right? In case of UPI, there is near zero transaction fees which anyone makes, correct? There is almost all the companies are operating at zero settlement model or maybe very little collection fees model as compared to global peers, right? Given the amount of heavy lifting and the risk which is there in terms of setting up these infrastructure and operating, how do you see these businesses making money over the period of time? How long do you think that the investment have to be done before you start seeing the flywheel propelling the growth so that you're able to make the businesses viable sustainably?
Well, I'll give you a quick answer, and post which maybe Harshil can add more to it. Look, globally payments has always been a thin margin business, right? Payments has always been a scale kind of a business where you'll start making money once you hit a certain scale. Margins are low, but if you reach a specific scale, that would be a significant enough. And if you look at China, you look at US, what happens is once you build your user base on top of payments here, you start offering other financial services. And I think if you look at even the topic is embedded finance, what you can do is extend these APIs to many other companies and let them offer many other financial services on top of it. So if you look at it, I don't see this as a challenge. Look at our banks. Our banks charge the lowest when you compare it with what happens in US or in China. But they are the most profitable businesses that are run in India. You look at the market cap, the top 10, 20 are banks or financial institutions. So there is no doubt that financial services or let's say traditional banking companies can make money. And we have seen that. What matters is, can you actually reach a specific scale or not? And once you can do it, obviously you can add more and more services where the take rates would be higher. That keeps adding to your margins and all. So I'll rest it over here and let Harshil do it, because I'm sure he's also coming out with many services over payments. So I'll let Harshil take over this one.
No, I think completely echo your point, Kiran. I think, as you said, like payments is a scale business, and you have to reach a significant scale before you start finding ways to make money, right? Like, I mean, it has always been a thin margin business. If you try to expand the margin on the small base, it's not going to work, because in the end, it's a utility that gets plugged in at a certain point of the transition. And in countries like India, where the core businesses itself don't make as much money as we would expect markets like US to make, you can't expect a payments rail to make that high of a margin that US markets would probably allow you to make, right? So, I mean, we have to understand that the depth of market in India is still fairly small, and when the market is expanding, the depth will take time to expand. So, the way to achieve, the way to approach the problem, and at least the way I see that we are approaching the problem, is that we have to build a significant scale where you cover enough number of businesses, enough number of consumers, even on the consumer side, where you have economies of scale, and then you can plug in more products, more services. Lending is one answer. You can add additional services. For example, we started as a payment gateway. Today, for those businesses that we work with, we don't just do payments. We help them with disbursements. We help them with payroll. We help them with corporate credit card. We help them with loans. And each of these is a thin margin business in itself. But as you combine it all together, the average revenue per user that we make from a merchant becomes significant at scale, where it adds up together to create economies of scale for us, where the revenue is sizable enough for the company to sustain. So I think that's the way almost every organization in the fintech space has to approach it, because like the market depth will take its own time to build out. But within each customer, if you look at, the problems are enormous. Like every merchant that we talk to, there's so many different problems that we can solve for, right? Starting from payments to insurance to wealth management to lending. And as you combine all of these problems together, the revenue pool that is approachable is significantly sizable enough for us to make money.
And Ashish, I'll just add to the point from a consumer's perspective, right? While what Harshal and Kiran are saying is correct from a merchant's perspective or a fintech's perspective, right? On a consumer's perspective, to give an example, right? I was talking to one of the college university chairman, right? And he asked student to pay the fees digitally, and every student gets charged 1.2%, right? For a service fee. That's a huge amount of fee, right? The amount of cost incurred in doing that transfer is obviously not 1.2%, right? So I'm saying there is an arbitrage definitely out there, right? And from a customer's perspective, they also feel that this is not fair, right? Like charging 10 rupees for a service fee might be okay. This is very similar to what Zerodha Grow are saying, right? Do direct investment, right? Or give us 50 paisa for a transaction, right? Don't do percentage based things, right? So I think that is where both the markets will at some point come together, right? And there'll be right fees based on the right cost involved. At the same time, there's a lot of more money to be made if you look at a bigger ecosystem. If you just keep looking at payments or smaller lending or cross-sell, right, or lead pass transfer and all, then the cost of customer acquisition is supremely high, right? And things are not going to work out, right? Or it will require a lot more money to be thrown, right? But if you look at a complete ecosystem and try to build something which touches way more points, right? I would use Google Pay 10, 15 times a day, right? I'll use banking app like twice a day, right? Or maybe twice a week, right? Similarly, there are different apps which I use. Can all of them be done seamlessly and provide a unique experience, right? Then finding money is something which all of us inventors are really good at.
Correct. No, completely echo, Vibhor. Because if you look at the use cases also, right, there are still very limited use cases and not everything is served for a consumer. If you look at merchants, many merchant has oversee remittance requirement. Many merchant has oversee collection requirement. And in the current ecosystem, it is super difficult. If you have to go to a bank, you have to submit 15 CA, 15 CD, prepare the checklist, submit it. Only then they will make one payment. If the payment is of $100, you'll end up spending $100 to enable that payment.
Absolutely.
So the experience is not seamless. So I think there are various use cases which are yet to be built, which are yet to become commodity, so that more and more people can start using it, right? Because only then we will be able to unlock commerce, right? Because still there are various things which are still not digital, primarily because of the way we are dealing with money. And once we are able to solve for some of those things, we will unlock a large economy over here. Vaibhav, can you hear us? No, I think he's still on mute. So my next question is, so given we were talking about lending, right? And lending is an important use case for this industry, right? Over the course of last few quarters, I think, and again, this is a question from one of the members in the audience, is regarding the open credit enablement network, which has come up over the course of last several quarters, wherein various account aggregators, lending institutions, all can use the infrastructure to enable some of these things. What's your view on how this is going to play out over the course of next few years? Do you think that something like this was required, or this will create more friction with respect to adoption of financial services? Again, this is an open question for anyone.
Sure, I could add to it. I think Oken is a platform play, right? It's an experiment, and it's very similar to how UPI was attempted, where we said that, okay, there are different banks, and if you pay from one bank to another, you have to go to your own bank and you have to do that. Today, lending works very similarly. If you have to take a loan, either you can take it from your bank, which already has data about you, and if you go to a third party to take a loan, then you have to submit a lot of documents, balance sheets, all of those things for them to be able to underwrite and give a loan to you. Right? And that form of lending, as you have probably seen in the last couple of years, doesn't work well for small businesses particularly, because it's very hard to judge a business just based on balance sheet of last year, especially in times like COVID, where you don't even know what happened last year will sustain for next year, right? So we have seen in the last couple of years, like cash flow based lending has become really popular, where you look at how the business is doing based on transactions that it has been undertaking, And the best people to do that today is banks, but banks don't have the appetite to lend to small businesses. If you approach a traditional lender, then the kind of documents and data set that you have to submit and their ability to consume that becomes really complicated. And you've seen fintechs come in that domain, being able to look at the data and being able to analyze it. But the challenge still remains the same, that access to data is still not uniform. And I think Oaken tries to solve that in a very beautiful way, where we decentralize the data available, we decentralize access to data, we decentralize access to lending across the ecosystem. So it builds a UPI kind of platform where on one side you can have data aggregators or account aggregators uploading information into the platform. On one side you have lenders who can get access to that information and help underwrite. You could have players like us playing a role in helping these lenders underwrite on top of that platform. And basically in the end, it enables access to lending to small businesses who never had access to lending in the traditional channels. So I think similar to UPI, I think it is an opportunity for the lending ecosystems to completely evolve from the way it has been done historically, and removes the proprietary data ownership, the closed loop ecosystem that gets built, and allows everyone to have access to the single central sources of data. And then we can plug in the underwriting technologies might be different. Somebody might give different weightages to different kinds of data, but you have access to the same sources of data. You can plug into that, look at the data and say that, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. I'm willing to lend to this merchant. And in the end, it increases availability of credit to the small merchants who become part of it. So I think it's a great experiment for the ecosystem to try. And if it works well, the access to credit that it can really allow these the SMEs to get access to could be really high. And that could really change the way the ecosystem grows. And when we talk to SMEs on our platform, the biggest challenge that we face in growth is access to credit. And the challenge is so deep. Like we launched, for example, 2-day, 3-day lending. It's a 2-day loan, but like today, 40% of our business take that loan, right? And if that is the amount of interest in a 2-day loan, imagine if if Oaken could allow access to 3 months, 9 months, longer term, larger loans to these businesses, the kind of growth that the ecosystem could see out of that could be really significant. And that's why I would say it is as big as UPI was in the payment space for lending.
I completely agree with you, Harshit, on this. So as Lightrock, we've invested in 9 companies, like I was mentioning earlier. And all our investments were basically focused around lending businesses, primarily because of the credit gap which we are seeing in a country like India, right? So we are a very credit-starved economy, starting from MSME to consumers so there are different use cases wherein we see the adoption of this thing. So I think this is going to be important, because the way the ecosystem is set up, availability of right type of capital at right point in time can unlock various things, which is not happening right now. So from that perspective, I think it will be very interesting to see how some of these institutions will respond to it and help in building the ecosystem around it. The other question which I have is on the role of some of these larger companies, right? Companies like Google Pay, companies like Jio, and Amazon also, because now they're very heavily integrated into the ecosystem. And WhatsApp also have received their approvals to do payment transactions on their platform. How do you see some of that impacting this industry, right? Because from distribution and from scale perspective, all of these companies have very, very massive distribution setup, which was built over the period of time for some other use case. Now they're trying to leverage it to offer financial services on top of it. So how will this impact your businesses in the industry you're operating?
All right, I can take it from neo-banking retail side, Ashish, right? Fundamentally, this really helps us, right? Because one of the bigger problem in this ecosystem is of educating a customer, right? Making him aware of what are the possibilities out there, right? And frankly, it takes a lot of money to do this marketing, right? Getting them comfortable with online shopping or using UPI, right? It's about educating and marketing, both of them, right? After a couple of time, a user gets comfortable and he sees that booking a cab in my room and then going down in the cab waiting is about experience and is better than me standing on the road and trying to hail a cab, right? So fundamentally, the market is very, very big a single player cannot do the expenses required to bring the complete market up, right? Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytms, all of these are spending a lot of money in doing that, right? And that really helps neobanks, smaller banks like us, right? Technology players like us who can actually then build on top of it and provide a better experience, right? A market would obviously have 15 to 18% early adopters, right? Now, if the market size fundamentally keeps growing, right, then this percentage of early adopters who will even experiment with neobanking or a product like ours is going to fundamentally increase, right, without a lot of cost on our head, right? And that is how I see all the investment happening, right? So I think it's a great thing that they're investing and they're getting into this market.
Yeah, just to add to what Vibhor said, Ashish, I mean, look, we are still at very initial stages in terms of overall transacting users in our country, right? And there are 3, 4, 5 players, but still, I mean, we are yet to see this number reaching 600, 700 million. So there's a lot of opportunity that is still left. And obviously, that doesn't mean that there'll be 20, 30 players, but 2, 3 more players can come in and can take away some market. The answer could be yes. But eventually it will be about the product and the experience that one is building. The best products doesn't matter whether they are incumbents or large players. What matters is the best user experience that counts. And eventually you will see, we saw how disruption happened in payments, and the whole ecosystem is ripe. I mean, is ripe for disruption to happen in lending, insurance, and like Harshil said, Oken is a great example of what we can do with lending. We have seen success stories with UPI. We have seen success stories with wallet. Now we can see similar examples in lending as well as in insurance going forward. So I would say it doesn't matter how many players are there. What matters is how large the opportunity size is, and what all companies come out with the great products offerings. I mean, those players are going to win eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Correct. No, again, one more thing which Vibhor just touched upon, right? Sometimes there is a first mover disadvantage, right? Wherein you spend huge amount of capital to educate the customer and make them aware about certain products and services, specifically in a very nascent industry like this, right? Because it requires a lot of behavior shift, trust resolution, all of those things. So many times in such business models, companies which come second, third, or fourth in the layer can basically ride on some of those advantages. But again, when they come, then the market is again very complicated, competitive. They have to have very unique value proposition so that you are able to compete in this environment and you are able to position yourself in front of everyone. So I think that's the beauty. I think we will all see together over the course of next 4 or 5 years how this will play out.
No doubt. And just to add, and I can talk, and obviously Harshil is there. Look, there were many payment gateways before Harshil started Razorpay, and he's built a great product and he has got a good market share because of the experience that he gives. Now, similarly, example was Paytm. Paytm it was the 42nd license when it got on the wallets, and there were players who had that license for many years before Paytm was there. And we have seen many such examples even on insurance. GoDigit came recently; they are doing phenomenally well. So it doesn't matter who has started or who are the incumbents. What matters is how great products or technology you use to make the end user experience great. And eventually, if you are able to do it, I don't think there's a dearth of a market opportunity size or how big you can become. So these are definitely exciting times and many unicorns to be built probably in the next 5 to 10 years. It's all about starting up and building great products.
Right. In fact, Kiran, I have been asked this question multiple times that given that there are so many payment companies, given that there are so many businesses already, does it make sense to invest in a new one? Right. And my answer is very similar to what you just mentioned over here. Because again, this is one of the fastest evolving industry, right? And the use cases are coming up very fast. If you don't adopt, if you don't innovate, you'll become redundant very fast. Correct, because some of the trends which will come up over the course of next 3 to 4 years will be very unique trends. And if you're not able to build your infrastructure to scale to those trends and not adopt to those things, you may end up becoming irrelevant. So Harshil, next question is to you. As Razorpay, I saw that you guys are doing various things here over the course of last 12 to 18 months, launched various new products right on top of Razorpay X. When do you see the next innovation coming in this space so that you continue to stay ahead of the curve? It will be largely limited to uh, some of the use cases which we discussed with respect to settlement, account reconciliation, or do you see more new use cases, very early trends, which you think over the course of next 5 to 6 years can become really big?
I think, and adding on to the earlier point that Kiran made, like I think we're at a very early stage of digitization journey in the fintech side, right? The finance is still done mostly through traditional channels. The digital side of finance is just begun, whether they talk about insurance, wealth management, payments, lending, everything. Like it's still fairly small percentage of the whole pie. So it doesn't matter who has won so far because the pie is so small that there's an entire market that is about to get opened up, and the winner would be decided based on who captures the new coming market, not who has captured the existing market. If you talk about where that growth is going to come from, I think in the last 10 years, the way you do personal banking has changed significantly, right? Like, I mean, I remember 10, 15 years back, I would still have to go to a bank branch at least once a month to withdraw cash or to do something or to go to an ATM or something. I think at last year, especially in COVID, I don't think I've ever stepped into a bank branch, right? And that has happened because of the way you do personal banking has changed significantly. The way you manage personal finance has changed significantly. The way you do wealth management has changed significantly, and all of those things. But if we talk about businesses, their life hasn't changed that much. Like even if we talk to a small business today, and we speak to them today, the way they manage their payroll, the way they manage their compliances, the way they manage their taxes, the way they manage everything else is still fairly traditional. It's still done primarily through paper-based processes, or there's a large finance team doing most of those things. And I think I think if you were to ask me, I think the next opportunity is there. The kind of innovation that we have seen on the personal side, on the B2C side, in the last 10 years, I think there's a lot of that opportunity that's going to come out in the next couple of years in the B2B side. A lot more companies will come in, a lot more startups will come in, a lot more innovation will happen. Who will win will be decided on who has the best product, who is able to build the right customer connect. But the ecosystem is definitely going to change significantly. And that's why I believe that's a huge opportunity in the B2B side. The kind of innovation that we'll see, the kind of money that we'll see coming in, the kind of companies that we'll see coming out of this will be really huge. And everyone is trying their own segments. We are focusing on the internet player side because that's our strength. There are companies like Khatabook and others who are focusing on the Dukaan tech side, which is on the lower side. There are companies who are focusing on the upper end, trying to digitize the enterprise side in a different way, bringing competition to SCB and the traditional systems that have been used. So everyone will approach different segments, different portions of that, and we see a lot of innovation coming out. Long-term winners will decide in the next 5 to 10 years. It's still too early to take a call on who will win that space. But one thing is for certain, the ecosystem is definitely going to change for the good.
No, completely agree with you, Harshil, on that front, right? Because this is a very large market, and there are various layers, right? And different types of organizations are operating in different domains. So the use cases are so vast and so non-related to each other that multiple companies will operate simultaneously. The need of an enterprise or a large MNC is completely different as compared to that of SME versus an MSME, right? Versus the retail consumer, right? And within service class, manufacturing. So I think the use cases are limitless, and all of that will open up opportunities. Given that we have 7 minutes, I'll quickly go over the questions which the audience have asked. I think some of the questions I've already covered during the conversation. One of the question is on the views on models such as Khatabook and OK Credit, Dukaan, Harshil just touched upon, in terms of analyzing the working capital need of the consumer, of the merchants. What's the view basically on those business models, how they will use data versus models like yours, which are payment enablers, right? Your data set is completely different as compared to their data set, right? How do you see that interacting, and how do you see how it will play out over the period of time?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think what like companies like Khatabook and others are doing versus what we are doing are very similar. It's just the segments are different, and that's the difference between traditional banking and the way we are companies like us or fintech companies are approaching. It's built for a particular customer base. You first pick up the customer base and then build for that. We are very focused that we are built for the internet businesses, and we are very strongly focused on that. So we started with payments because in internet businesses, digital payments is the first easiest way to enter, and then we can expand services from there. Khatabook and the contact type companies are entering from the ledger space, from the Khata and accounting space, because that's the biggest problem in that segment. But the idea is essentially same, that you want to first get into the business, build enough proof points, enough data set about the business. So whether it happens through payments for us or whether it happens through ledger entries for them, and then use that data set to be able to build value-added services on top, whether it's lending, whether it's, in our case, it's lending, it's payroll, it's corporate credit card, it's so many other things. In their case, it could be other forms of lending. The kind of lending that is needed in that segment is different. So it's different segments, and I don't think there's a right answer to it. Every customer segment will evolve independently. Every customer segment will serve a different customer base. And unlike traditional banking, where you have one large bank covering entire spectrum, right from large to small, I think in neo-banking and fintech, we'll see different companies targeting different segments and building end-to-end solution for that segment. I think we are trying to do it for the internet space. They will try to do it for the Khata and other spaces. And the kind of data that you'll generate, the kind of product, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to neo-banking, right? You can't say that, okay, we'll build an equivalent of an HDFC Bank, we'll serve everyone from retail to large to everyone else in one single platform. And then you lose the essence of neo-banking. The essence of neo-banking or the way fintech has been built right now is product first, where you have to look at the customer base you're after and you have to build products for them. And so I think I'm equally excited about all of these spaces.
Correct, fair point. Next question, Vibhu, this one is for you, and very interesting question, right? So Digibank, DBS, when they entered into the economy, when they entered into the market, their idea was to remain branchless, right, and be completely digital. That was their initial hypothesis when they started. But then they acquired Lakshmi Vilas Bank, correct, over the course of last several years, I think, to set up a branch infrastructure or to own some of those infrastructures. So transition from completely digital to physical infrastructure, whereas what we are talking about over here is physical to digital, right? So this is another question from the audience. Do you see this becoming a trend, or this is one of the cases where there's a need to provide holistic, full-end customer experience? That is why Digibank has taken this approach in terms of building out both digital first and then going into physical infrastructure.
I agree, Ashi. I think you already answered the question in some sense, right? This is a bank who is doing it, right? They don't have choices, right? And actually, they don't have to make choices, right? They can go full on everything, right? It's a startup like us or neobank which needs to focus on a specific market or a customer base, right? And fundamentally, even if we go out, right, we all know a check is still required, right? That is a legal right way of paying for a lot of transactions, right? You can't just get rid of that part. DDs are required when you're paying fees, things like those. So a bank has to have branches, right? Because if you are a customer and you want to transfer fees, right, you need a bank branch, right, where you can deposit cash, right? Because a lot of people earn in cash, especially the rural and small cities, right? Which is where this becomes very, very important, right? So fundamentally, I think banks don't have to take that risk. They need to pass on the baton of digital banking to us rather than building their own, right? That is somewhere neobanks will pop up, right? And do the right thing. Bank-less branching, I think, is something they can definitely continue doing, and they will have to keep expanding on that.
Correct. No, you are absolutely right. I think over the course of last 2 decades, right, some of these larger banks, public sector as well as private sector banks, they've done a good job in terms of building out that infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right. And on the lending side, also, if you look at small finance banks or if you look at microfinance institutions, they have also done that hard work to set up the physical infrastructure. Right. And this is the time how you can leverage those infrastructure to provide more seamless experience to the customer, wherein you don't have to set up this physical infrastructure yourself, and at the same time provide unified experience both with respect to availability as well as with respect to access. Yeah. So I think it will be interesting to see how some of these models will evolve over the course of next 5 to 7 years. We have 1 minute. One last question to the panelists before we wrap up this call. If you have to make one ask to the regulator, given the industry where you are operating is still very nascent, what would be that ask to the regulator?
I mean, I generally have one ask from the regulator that don't interfere as much as you can. Like the less interference from the regulator is generally the better. We have seen industries get completely destroyed when there's too much interference. It's good to have guidelines. It's good to have a framework, but too much regulation, especially in a space which is very early, can sabotage it very quickly. Right? You need regulations when it hits a certain scale, when customer safety becomes important. But in the early days, lesser interference is generally better.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one of the things which we keep running into is a lot of interference which is answered with a gray color, right? It's not either black, it's not white, right? So it's always a confusion, right?
Regulations are
So
yet
it needs to be
catching up.
very, very transparent.
Correct, correct. You have been a wonderful panel. Thank you again for all the insights which you have shared. And thank you, IIT Bombay, for organizing this event. Over to you, Danish and team. I think we are 2 o'clock now. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.